saving up my cash and all my paychecks. We've been checking up, we've been making love. Now let's do this right. What if I told you I've been making plans lately? What if I told you I got something I wanna say? What if I wanna get on one knee and ask for eternity? Tell me, what would you say? You better get ready, baby, 'cause I do, but I need to hear it from you, from you, from you. Before I go all in, before I make myself look stupid, I need to hear you say it. I wanna see you in that all white dress with your pops on your lap, with every eye on us. We got so much here, there's no cold feet. Haven't we waited enough? I'm ready to cross the line. I'm ready for the rest of my life. I just wanna surrender to you. You better get ready. I do, but I need to hear you say it, baby. From you, before I let it show, I go all in. Before I let it go, baby. No stupid. I need to hear you say it. I need to hear you say it.
What's up, hackers? Welcome to Saturday Hacker Day. My name is Taggart, and today we are gonna finally set up our home lab. Lots to do today, but before we do that, as always on Saturdays, we're gonna kick off the week's cyber news. Am I a little quiet? Seems like I might be a little quiet. Y'all let me know if the sound is okay. But let's kick off. Yeah, I thought so. But let's kick off with our first story, which is CVE 2021-4034. Now, this is interesting in that this is in a rare exception for us, we actually already covered this story this week. On Tuesday, we actually played around with this vulnerability and got it to work on our system and showed how scary it is. This is being tracked as PwnKit, and if you're not familiar with it, this is a vulnerability that has been in the policy kit or PwnKit in Linux, modern Linux distributions, for about 12 years. And it was introduced with a tool called pkexec. What is pkexec? So pkexec is an executable that allows you to interact with the PwnKit framework in order to set permissions, things like that. It's about setting up, execution policies on Linux. Now, the thing about pkexec that makes it so tempting a target for something like this is that it runs with what is called SUID privileges, or it has the SUID bit set. What that basically means is that when you set the SUID bit on an executable in Linux, what it means is that the executable is going to run with the effective user ID of the owner of the executable. So if root owns the executable, then it will run with the effective ID, not of the person who is invoking the executable, but of root. Okay, and so if you can get the application to do something that it's not supposed to do, it will be doing that something as root. And that's exactly what this exploit was able to do. It turned out there was it's being described as a memory corruption vulnerability. And I think that's really basically the best way to describe it. Essentially, when you send parameters to a program when it runs, especially C programs on Linux, there are two important variables. Well, three. It's three important variables that it ends up getting. The first one is the count of command line arguments. And then the second one is an array of those arguments. And then the third is the set of environment variables that the program will use to define its environment as it runs. Now, when you do this on the command line, you type a command, those things are being handled for you in most cases, right? It's passing the count and it's passing the command line arguments that you're sending. But if you use the C function execve, you get to define all that stuff yourself when you invoke a function or a system command. So if you mutate what you're sending to it so that it doesn't contain what it's expecting, pkexec had a flaw that it would essentially read ahead and pull in values into positions that it shouldn't have. Consequently, what you could do is introduce what are called unsecure environment variables into the program's run. And they're unsecure because in the normal run of things, these would have been cleared out. But because it's already passed through, right, it's read in environment variables in ways that it shouldn't have, you kind of bypass that check. The long and the short of it is, with this vulnerability, you are able to introduce variables that tell pkexec to load whatever kind of shared library you want. And if you've crafted that shared library the correct way, you can get that code that you've written yourself to execute with pkexec, which gets you a root shell or whatever else you want to do as root. So this has been patched. Luckily, there are patches available for all major distributions. Go ahead and update systems if you're responsible for them, or tell people to update systems if you can tell people to do so. But while this thing is around, and I think it's probably going to be around for a minute because Linux systems don't get updated necessarily with the same frequency as other systems, it's a really, really easy privilege escalation vector. Now, this is fun for us, especially if we're doing hack the boxes or try hack me's. If you're really struggling with the intended get to root path, if it hasn't been updated, just fire this off and it'll work. Maybe that wasn't the intention of the box, but you can certainly get to root with this thing. But it's also really scary for people who actually have to maintain Linux servers. And so definitely note that this is something that we should be watching for as defenders. Now, in its most naive exploitation, this vulnerability does leave trails in logs saying that, shells was basically environment variables weren't set correctly, and it leaves those errors. However, there is a way, which I'm not super familiar with yet, but there is a way to exploit this without leaving telltales in the logs. So again, it's something that we really have to be on the lookout for. And you might think, well, how do you defend against something like that? The best I can do, if you don't have audit-d or something else, or something else, is we have logging like sysmon for Linux or some other things that are actually tracking command line executions. That might be a help here, depending on how things are getting invoked. But remember that this does require prior access to the system, so our best line of defense is probably keeping unauthorized users off the system in the first place. Is there an easy test if a machine is vulnerable to it without running the exploit? Well, the exploit isn't really damaging killer, so I would say honestly run the exploit to see if you can pop a shell. It doesn't do any damage to the system, and so there's plenty of proof of concept code out there, and so I would do that. That would be the test. Yeah. I mean, you could write a non-shell popping version of this, but it would still be exploiting the vulnerability. Okay, moving on. This week we saw a little bit of new activity from the Lazarus Group, which is the North Korean advanced persistent threat actor. Now, Lazarus is unique in amongst nation state threat actors, at least the ones that are overtly nation state threat actors, because they definitely want to get paid. We obviously have ransomware actors that are interested, or we have ransomware actors that are tied to nation states, right? But the Lazarus Group is like overtly funded by DPR. The DPRK. They work for the government. So it is interesting that they are out for money. It may be not so surprising, but they have a financial motivation as well as a political motivation. But we saw a new write-up from Malwarebytes this week about some new tactics using the Windows update mechanism to download DLLs. So this was kind of cool. I think it was worth checking out. The write-up here from Malwarebytes is excellent. And of course, like all of these attacks, the first thing that happens is a phishing lure, right? So you have to click on something, you have to download a Word document with macros in it. This one was targeting higher-ups, C-suite people, and it was using defense contractor job opportunities, I think, as the lore here. Yeah, I think one of the file names was Lockheed Martin job opportunities. Lockheed Martin, if you're not familiar, is a major defense contractor. They produce the F-35. They've produced the F-22. Yeah, they're an aerospace company. And they one of the things that's interesting in the screenshot from the document that Malwarebytes showed was the language. And I made this point on Twitter, but I want to make it again. So the document says, because whenever you open up a Word document that has these macros in it, which is just embedded code, you have to enable that code to run. And so to convince the target to do so, there's some text on the document that says, this document has been protected by Lockheed Martin IT team. To view or edit this document, please click enable content button on the top yellow bar. Why do I think this is interesting? So as a former English teacher, the first thing I saw was missing direct articles. In English, the direct article is the word the, THE, right? Exactly, the button, or even protected by not the Lockheed Martin IT team, but Lockheed Martin IT team. And the reason I mention this is because for whatever reason, I know the reason, to my knowledge, there is no East Asian language that has direct articles like that. Chinese doesn't have it. I don't think Korean does. Japanese doesn't. And that concept for non-native English speakers, especially from East Asia. Bonjour, mon capitaine. Ça va? Most yeah, that concept of the direct article using the word the before nouns is really, really challenging for them. And that is good news for us who are native English speakers trying to defend against phishing lures. If you are familiar with that and you see it in data, you see it in phishing lures, you should be suspicious of what's going on. So just something to think about. If you see that language, right, be a little bit sus, especially if it's a professional document, an official document. Usually those folks have people to proofread. And so if you see those simple grammar mistakes in those documents, maybe sus. And so I just think it's great that though that continues to be a challenge in this day and age. You should be suspicious if anything asks you to enable content in a Word file. Also true. Yep. But even before you get to the download, usually there are grammar mistakes in the email itself, right? And always be aware of those, especially if it looks like a grammar mistake from somebody that doesn't usually make them. But in addition to the grammar stuff, which obviously caught my eye, it, this write-up is really worth a read because of the deep dive it goes into in how it is hooking parts of the Windows kernel to do what it wants to do, how it uses Windows Update, and how this malware uses GitHub as a command and control channel. Really, really fascinating write-up of how this looks, and a lot of good material for threat hunters. Finally, a bit of good news. Microsoft is finally, speaking of macros, going to be disabling XLM or Excel 4.0 macros by default. This is going to start in July of 2021, according to the story in Bleeping Computer, and that it would disable XLM macros in all tenants in Microsoft 365 or Microsoft, or in Windows, I should say, if the policy to turn it on has not been enabled. So you can re-enable them with group policy, but why on earth would you want to? If you're not familiar with XLM macros, or Excel 4.0 macros, they are a prior version of macros that actually are in line inside of the Excel spreadsheet. They're not a separate VB script file that are embedded, and they use a specific syntax to execute things. For a long time, these were a little bit tricky for antivirus and EDR to detect. They've gotten better at doing so, but they are still a pretty legitimate way of getting past a lot of defenses. And so it's great. And also, the other thing that was scary about XLM macros is that you could have them in a straight up .xls file without having the .xlsm file extension indicating that there were macros inside of the file. So people could open up one of these admittedly older spreadsheets, but still just open them up without having any indication that there was malware inside of them. And then the thing could be set to the XL4 macro could be hidden and set to run on open. So they were a really, really interesting and sometimes highly effective way of getting your malware onto a system. I've used them myself in my own threat emulation. People will just have to hide malware in PDFs. That's certainly already happening, since PDFs can contain JavaScript. In fact, I was working I was working an incident response similar to that this week. All right, so that is the news out of the way. We are ready to take a look at our home lab setup. So I want to start with a little bit of story time about how we got here, what we're trying to do, and like kind of the logistics of how I got an enterprise server into my house, and how it's actually working. So what I found was this machine. Let me switch over to our live desktop and get some music back going. So this machine that I'm talking to you from is pretty beefy. Hey, somebody else, good to see you. It's no slouch. It's got a really nice processor in it, multiple cores. It's got 64 gigs of RAM. Could I do better? Sure. But I was trying to do this on a bit of a budget. It has a GPU that was capable of running, a couple of displays, as well as, streaming and doing what I needed to do. And I built this machine with the intention of also being able to virtualize some stuff in order to do demonstrations live on stream. And that's been working great. And certainly we've looked at the Hyper-V setup that I have a bunch of different times here. You can see I still have some VMs in my Hyper-V environment. I really like working with Hyper-V most of the time. It's a fast hypervisor. I really have had a lot of success with it. But as the most predictable problem ever, we scaled, right? The things we started trying to virtualize became more and more complex. I was running out of memory to do it, and also I was running into some roadblocks in terms of the complexity of what I wanted to do and being able to bring it up and bring it down on a frequent basis. You can run Windows machines unlicensed for 30 or 90 days, depending on the version of Windows that you're talking about, whether it's a server or a desktop. And that's cool. But then after that, what do you do? After that 30 days, if you still want your domain controller or whatever, what are you going to do? So what you need to have ultimately is a way of bringing up and down these kinds of environments rapidly if you want to iterate on an experiment. So I started coming up with ways that made sense to do that. And to be fair, this is a solved problem, kind of. There are environments out there that do this for you. So I think probably the best known one is called Detection Lab. And yeah, let's take a look at the GitHub repository here. So if you want to check this out, Detection Lab is really, really cool. And it has a lot going on. It's designed to build a Windows domain that comes preloaded with security tooling and some best practices when it comes to system logging configurations. It can be easily modified to fit most or expanded to include additional hosts. And a lot of the technologies that it's using are things that I want to check out. But honestly, as I looked more and more into Detection Lab, it was too much. It was too much. But maybe now that I have Proxmox up, I'll go back and check this out. But it was just a lot, you know what I mean? And so I didn't feel like, and too much was getting automated away. I wanted to understand how the environment was getting built out. And so this uses Vagrant, this uses Packer. These are great technologies for automating builds of virtual machines. So this is kind of like the direction that we're going. I started working on my own kind of lab environment that was way, way, way simpler. And one of the things I wanted to do was actually avoid Vagrant, and here's why. What I found with Vagrant was that the networking layer of Vagrant, especially with Hyper-V, was super limited. I couldn't do a lot of what I wanted to do with Vagrant, and even with Packer, it's actually, Packer only builds the application, right? It doesn't really handle the networking layer. And so I needed this other way of defining the complex networking that I was interested in doing. And we'll talk about what that network diagram looks like in a second. So I started playing around with my own stuff, and what I basically landed on was using Packer to build out images or like OVF packages or whatever else, and then importing those and then using my own scripting to define the networking. The reason I was doing that, certainly for Hyper-V, it was because it was the only way to do it. I could only use PowerShell to define my Hyper-V networks in a meaningful way. But I also there is something to be said for automating the tedious stuff, but kind of not automating it too far. I don't know if that makes any sense. I don't love the idea of just like downloading Detection Lab, hitting go on one of these configurations and just having it build it for me. I want to understand how it's using my equipment and what it's actually setting up for me, so that if I have to set it up on my own, I know what it's doing. That might be kind of an older school, not super DevOpsy way of thinking about things, but that is where I want to start. So as we build out this home lab, we're going to start doing it a little bit by hand, and then we're going to move into the automation components of it, but we're going to do that only after we understand what it is we're doing at the base level, so that we understand what the automation is going to be doing for us. Remember that the intention of this is not just to, have fun on stream. We are trying to teach some skills here. So I'm a big believer in, if you're going to be administering systems, even if you're a DevOps person, like, you should probably know what the underlying OS is doing. So for example, if you run Kubernetes stuff, like, cool, please also have some Linux system administration experience. That's almost always true. But like, if you abstract stuff too far, there are potentials to miss problems at the lower levels or miss exploits at the lower levels. Okay, so Fubar, thank you so much for the follow, and KR Velis, thank you so much for the follow. So with that, what will be the OS on the lab? Glad you asked. So I chose Proxmox as my hypervisor host and my OS on the server. I chose Proxmox not only because it's free and open source, but because it did all the things that I wanted my virtualization environment to do without too much overhead. And what were those things? So obviously, Proxmox has a great web interface. You're going to see it in just a second. It is using KVM under the hood, so I know that it's going to be a fast hypervisor. It does have support if I need it, right? I can choose to get a low level, I think it's like 95 euros for the year, for enterprise support, which gives me updates and extra features. What is the difference between running something like VMware than running a dedicated OS like vSphere or Proxmox? Kind of the difference is open source, right? So VMware and vSphere or ESXi, those are proprietary solutions. They work fine. If you want the full feature set, you're going to have to pay for a license. And there was one feature set in particular that I really, really wanted out of my hypervisor that I wasn't going to get for the free license with VMware, which was API access. And the reason I want API access is because the other tool that I eventually want to build toward using in our automation is Terraform. Right? So what I want to eventually do is start using Terraform to build out code that defines our lab environment and components of it, so I can mix and match and bring them up and down quickly with definitions in Terraform syntax rather than having to do it all by hand. Unfortunately, in order to do that with ESXi, I need a license. Or with anything else more expensive from VMware, I need a license to do that. But there's a Proxmox provider for Terraform that works out of the box. So I was pretty excited by that. And of course, one of the kind of core values of this channel is to use open source whenever possible. And so for those reasons, Proxmox was the obvious choice. I could have gone like straight KVM as well, but that would have not been as easy to work with Terraform, and it would have been a little bit more overhead for me from an administration standpoint. So I'm trying to be as free and open as possible, but I'm also not trying to make this my whole job. So that's why we're using Proxmox. Now, in terms of hardware, what ended up showing up at my house? I've worked with enterprise servers for a surprisingly long time now, and so I knew that I wasn't going to be able to... I knew I was going to be spending money, right? But I also knew that there are lots of places that get rid of perfectly good hardware before its end of life, and that there might be some really good deals to be found on servers if I looked carefully enough. And of course, the first place that I went was, well, actually, the first place I went was this site we use in the United States called GovDeals. And GovDeals has just like government surplus auctions, and you can kind of look around to see if there's like servers someplace, and sometimes they're crazy things, right? It's like racks of server equipment that you can find all across North America. I think there are some Canadian listings in here as well, but definitely across the United States. Kind of wild amounts. But I wasn't able to find anything super local in Southern California, so I decided to look on eBay, like you do, and I found this outfit called Save My Server. And Save My Server was absolutely clutch here. I found well-refurbished systems that were within my price range. So what I ended up getting was an HP ProLiant DL380p with dual Xeons. So I have 20 processor cores at my disposal and 64 gigs of RAM. And I have, it came with two 900 gig hard drives that are RAID, I think they're RAID 1. I can redo that if I want, but so basically I have like 800 gigs of space to start, and I can add to that if I need it, because I've got open bays. All of this, just in terms of transparency, including shipping, was somewhere around 450 US. So honestly not that bad considering what I got. Um, it could have been a lot worse. And in fact, the places that I was looking elsewhere had the similar systems for double that, if not more. Yeah, it cost way less than the desktop that I'm using now, actually. Yeah, so the ProLiant was it was an HP ProLiant. I'll type it out here. DL380p Gen 8. And nope. Yeah, it was one of these. And so really, really nice machine. The Gen 9s, I think, are current. So it was one gen back, but totally, totally worth it. I don't need the latest and greatest for this. But yeah. So that's what I have. And yes, did it cost money? Yes, I had to. Is it going to cost money and power? Yes. I'm not going to run it 24/7. I'm going to run it when I need it because I don't want to use electricity that I don't have to use. I'm not mining Bitcoin or anything, but even so, you know, it's going to make a difference. Now, in terms of other stuff that I did to kind of prep my space, I'm in kind of an older house, so I had to be very aware of wiring and how much current I was pulling so I didn't trip any breakers. So I did have to strategically place the machine. Did I already have a rack, or is it living on a tabletop? I didn't have a rack, but what I did have was some modular shelving. And I was able to take one of those shelving, like shelves, and it fit the machine perfectly. It's a 2U unit, so it's like this tall. And I was able to just kind of slip it down. A solar panel or two might power it up. Totally possible. I don't own my house, so there are some modifications that I can't make, unfortunately. I live in Los Angeles and I'm a millennial, so there's no way that we can, buy a house here. Yeah, we get plenty of sun, Killer. This is LA. But it's just about, what I can do to the house and what I can't. But so the other thing I did, thinking about power considerations, was I did add a little bit to the cost of startup here by purchasing a UPS, a universal power, an uninterrupted power supply, right? From APC. They're like $150, maybe a little bit more. And what you get is not only a battery backup, so if the breaker trips, I can, fix that without bringing down the system. But also it has current, voltage smoothing. So if there's a lot of variance in the actual current coming through the outlet, the UPS is going to smooth that out and make it a little bit easier for the machine to do what it needs to do. That is a huge, huge, huge thing that you want for a server. The other thing, just to know, if you are interested in getting into this and looking to get a server of your own, just be aware that server commerce is a totally different animal from regular computer commerce. Okay? When you get one of these machines, even if you get it refurbished, if you ever need support or if you ever need to get parts replaced, it is a very, very old school system, meaning that you're working with an enterprise, company. In fact, HP, right? I got an HP server. It's a ProLiant, but the company that sells them is actually HPE, HP Enterprise. It's not the same company as Hewlett Packard that makes, like the HP Elite laptop or whatever. It's a totally different organization. And the way that you interact with them is so old school. You're going to have to call them. You're going to have to provide all these keys, right? If there's a part that has to come out, it's entirely possible that a technician is going to have to come to your house, right? To replace it. That's the level that we're talking about here. It's a very old way of doing business. And just be aware of that when you start getting into this. Now, you can actually Save My Server has parts as well, so if you feel confident replacing components on your own, that's cool. You can definitely do that. In terms of startup, just some stuff that was a bit of a problem. When I got the machine, there were a couple of things that were not set up correctly. So for one thing, the USB ports were disabled on my server when I got it, which is a huge pain. It makes sense if you're racking one of these things in a data center and you know for sure you're never ever going to use the front ports. You disable them so you prevent that physical attack vector against the machine. The reason that you don't need them for these is that HPs in particular have something called ILO, right? Integrated Lights Out Management, where they have a dedicated network interface that you remote into and manage the machine with that, rather than, you know, plugging a keyboard or a KVM, a keyboard and a video system into the machine itself. That's really not how data centers work anymore. I mean, they have them like per rack, but it's really not the way that you interact with your machines. So instead of doing that, but I needed to, right? Because I'm not a data center. I needed that. So I got myself a little keyboard, and these monitors do have VGA inputs. Voodoo Ray says you need ILO Advanced to keep KVM after post. Say more about that, Voodoo Ray. That's a lot of shortcuts there. But so it wasn't working. So the first thing I needed to do was reset the BIOS basically to allow USB interaction from the box. The system board has these reset switches on it, and I had to make sure that the right one was set up. Power on the machine, do the thing, it resets the BIOS, and I'm good to go. But even then, it was being a little bit touchy about like when USB was powered on and off. Apparently that's a thing with these ProLiants. What I found out was like if you press keys before the like boot menu and BIOS options are presented to you, that can disable the keyboard. Buddha says it's a license for ILO that allows you to see and control the screen. Yes, that is right. So in order to use ILO, you need a license for it, which I don't have. What I did find, though, when I did get the machine to boot, not from my Proxmox boot disk, but just to the hard drives that were in there, is that Save My Server did not delete the Windows operating system that was on the disks previously. So just be aware of that when you're getting refurbished gear, or if you're selling to one of these, that you want to completely wipe the system. And I don't mean like quick format it. I mean you want to zero out the drive the long way, where you actually write zeros to every single sector, because otherwise there's going to be data on there. And this is not the first time this has happened to me. When I buy refurbished, I've found like Mac Minis that have had somebody else's account on there, or somebody else's iCloud account insanely. So definitely something to be aware of. Now, obviously, I completely reformatted the disk. I got rid of whatever the data was on there because I don't want to see that stuff. I don't want to have anybody else's bits, you know, either digital or otherwise, in this thing. So it's all clean now, and we're set up. We're ready to go. Last night was kind of the first successful startup. You don't need to hack anymore, just buy their used stuff. So actually, I will say, you know, for my organization, for example, like we have a very, very strict policy that yes, we recycle our electronics, but we take a drill to every piece of storage media that is leaving the premises. We do not, and then we like recycle that equipment elsewhere. Like, you really got to be careful with that stuff. Okay, so we are ready to get started. Now, I think I did a diagram put into a microwave. The drill method is infallible. Do you do data rewipes? Yes, Praxeus, don't worry. We zero out everything. it's no secret who my employer is, and I can promise you that the University of California has to abide by DoD grade processes for wiping. Yeah, not only do we zero, we physically destroy, and then the remains are off-sited with a trusted partner. So, like, we're good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the plan here. I put together this diagram a little bit before, and I don't know how valid it's going to be with this new setup, but basically what we want to do is we want to define inside of our virtual environment a single point of access for our different components of the lab. Get out of here, Xmind. The reason we want to do that is because we want to have full control over the networking stack without having to worry about physical networks as much as possible. So what I want to do is I basically want to set up 2 virtual switches. One of them is going to be the default switch that has internet access, and another one that is going to be the isolation lab that doesn't. So I want the isolation lab to internally have networking capabilities. So like if I say the domain controller is in the isolation lab, I want the workstation to also be in the isolation lab. So they're internally networked, but neither one of them should have internet access unless I like need it for something. But I need that isolation, especially if we're going to be doing malware analysis. I need to be able to shut off that network entirely from the internet. And that's why we're going to do a separate vSwitch that isn't connected to anything unless I deem it necessary. But I do need some stuff to have access to the internet. And in particular, I need my SOC lab I need my SIM to have access to the internet because I need to update it with new signatures. And I need my Ansible server to have access to the internet as well because I need to be able to download plugins. What is Ansible? So the plan eventually is to define most of the stuff that our servers do with Ansible roles or playbooks. And that way we'll be able to easily add or remove functionality from our lab machines with Ansible, including our Windows machines. And what I really want to do, because I was playing with this a little bit, what I really want to do is standardize on using SSH to control, yes, even the Windows machines, because you can do that these days. So rather than having to go through the headache of setting up WinRM across the board, I will enable WinRM for pen testing purposes, but in terms of the actual management that I will be doing, everything in the environment is going to have SSH capability. And then just not worry, have Ansible set up with SSH and call it a day. Any questions so far about what we're doing or how or why? I'll also say that the absolute linchpin in this network architecture is another important piece of open source software, which is pfSense. So our firewall and router for our virtual environment, both the internet connected component and the isolated component, is going to be pfSense. I have used pfSense a ton. I love it. I think it's a really, really nice open source firewall. It's not, perfect by any means, but it does exactly what I need it to do. And it's really fantastic, especially for things like separating environments, doing NAT if you need to. It's just really, really solid for this. Praxeus, quick cue about Ansible. How large is the barrier to entry? Is it just YAML JSON config files? I'll also be building up your pfSense elk stack soon for the first time. Oh, cool. Yeah. So, I mean, we're doing that. So definitely play along. How large is the barrier to entry? I think that if you are new to the concept of configuration management, Ansible's, pick your poison, basically, whether you're doing Ansible, Chef, Salt, or whatever else, Puppet, right? Every one of them has their own weirdnesses. Things I like about Ansible. I like the way that it defines things a little bit more sanely. I really just, for the life of me, cannot get my head around Puppet's syntax or the way that it defines information. I do not understand its organization. Like, I've used it successfully, but I can't stand it. Hey, Dust on Keyboard. So instead, Ansible. I also like that Ansible is by default a push method rather than a pull. So Puppet, for example, uses an on-system agent to pull new, what are they called? Modules, right? Whereas Ansible pushes, so you're starting from the config manager and pushing out to the groups that you want to push a role or a playbook out to. I prefer that model just because, especially for this sort of situation, because I get to control exactly what gets what. Smash asks, would you recommend someone new to setting up labs to set up Security Onion for logging and monitoring? So Security Onion is great. It has some drawbacks, and I am going to not use Security Onion for this lab. But Security Onion is great if you want a one-stop shop, out-of-the-box, it works thing. But in this particular configuration, Security Onion will suck, and here's why. Security Onion does not expect to be in a bifurcated virtual environment like what we've just described. Because if you think about what you have in Security Onion, it requires two interfaces. It requires a management interface and a packet capture interface to use with Zeek and the other packet capture utilities. Here's the problem. If I'm packet capturing from my isolation lab, right? And then I have an internet connected other interface. If that other interface isn't my management interface, if I want to access that some other way, meaning a third network interface in Security Onion does not know what to do with that. It requires that, basically, it doesn't know how to handle 3 interfaces. It only knows how to handle 2. And for the way that I've used it and designed these labs, it just does not play well. And because all of Security Onion is configured internally with Salt managing Docker containers, it is an absolute nightmare to update the configurations in any meaningful way. I have tried so many times to use Security Onion to do what I'm trying to do, and I have just hit my head against some wall too many times. So as much as this sounds like an invective against Security Onion, if you don't have that kind of weird network architecture problem, it is a great way to get started with all of these tools all at once. Prax, Ansible is configuring the settings on the machine. Can it auto-provision install a new VM from an ISO? No. Ansible is post-provisioning. So think about, like, the way that you would separate responsibilities here is you can use Vagrant to bring up the VM, or in our case, you can use Terraform to bring up the VM. What is the source of the VM? Either you can do it from a raw ISO, which would be crazy, or you can use Packer to build from a raw ISO and have a pre-made starter, which is what we're going to do. This isn't totally ready for prime time, but it is open. You can check out this repo. In the test branch, I have the virtual box that is actually pretty well built out. So what we have here, this is kind of what is going on with Detection Lab, but much, much simpler. So here's, like, for example, the pfSense Packer build script. So what you have to do with Packer is you build, depending on what kind of auto provisioning you have, you have to give it a build script to kind of automate the install process from the ISO. Before I go too far, Voodoo Ray, Will you use pfSense to control and inspect traffic between VLANs and machines in the lab? I will not use pfSense. I will use it to control. And I'm not planning on using, you said VLANs. I'm not actually planning on using .1Q. I will plan, they're separate networks entirely. So that's how I'm planning on doing it. Because I don't want to mess with .1Q tagging if I don't have to. That's what, VLANs would be. So I'm going to use pfSense to control, but inspect is going to be at another layer, right? That's going to be in my SIM using the ELK stack and Zeek and things like that. So it will see some of that. It is going to be the router, right? But the inspection of it, the security, I don't think so. Oh yeah, it is a private repo. I'm sorry. Let me change that. I'm totally forgetting where to change it to public. I will do it later. I promise I will make it public. But what I wanted to show you was if you don't have access to like automated provisioning, which you can do with Cloud Init and Ubuntu, or you can do it with Windows, but it's a huge pain. What you have to do is literally give it like key codes to walk through the installer. It's wild. So what happens is it starts up in VirtualBox or whatever your hypervisor is, starts up the VM to install, right? And you enter like the key presses you would have to do to walk through the installer and do the things that you're trying to do with it. It's insane. I don't like doing this, but this is the only way that I can figure out to build the way that I wanted to do it. Detection Lab probably has some better ways of putting this together, but this is where I was getting started. And you can variable out a bunch of this stuff to define your networking if you want to define your subnets, things like that. So we've talked about pfSense, we've talked about Proxmox, where we're going. Let's build a thing, right? Let's build a VM. So here we are in Proxmox. Finally, it's set up. I have named my hypervisor Starbase because I'm a giant Star Trek dork. And you'll notice that I have a couple of, the server itself has 4 network interfaces, but I'm actually not using any of them. What I'm actually connected to is a Linux bridge, which has a CIDR on my home LAN, right? And notice that, we got to change that phrasing, Proxmox, but that the bridge is bridged from EN0, Ethernet 1, which is where the cable is physically connected to the server. So that is where I'm starting. That is not the network that I plan on connecting everything else to. To change that up, I need to make a new switch. I can do it a couple different ways. If I click on create, by the way, is this too small? I can zoom this in. Yeah, it's a little bit better for everybody. I can either create a Linux-based bridge, or I can create what's known as an Open vSwitch bridge. I'm going to try to use Open vSwitch because Open vSwitch is a technology that is designed specifically for creating virtual networking. Now, these are the text-based config files. Luckily, though, Proxmox is a little bit like Webmin, if you've ever used Webmin, where if I click on any of these things, including shell, it just gives me like a shell onto my server, which is handy. But like if I go into DNS, I'm pretty much going to be just straight editing config files on the Linux system. And I know for sure that's true if I go to like some of the other stuff down in here. But at any rate, I want to create an Open vSwitch bridge is another word in this case for switch. So we'll call it VM BR1, and we'll call that the internet. Don't bridges separate broadcast domains? Yeah, they do. So bridge versus switch always mess with me. In this case, they are the same thing because there's no interlink, if that makes sense. A bridged connection normally would not change that, but in this case, if we go to, yeah, here we go. In Open vSwitch's documentation, it says a bridge is another term for a switch. It directs traffic to the appropriate interface based on MAC address. Open vSwitches should contain raw Ethernet devices along with virtual interfaces such as OVS bonds or OVS ports. These bridges can carry multiple VLANs and be broken out into internal ports to be used as VLAN interfaces on the host. So I'm starting with the bridge, and at the moment it's going to be pretty separate from everything else, right? And that's, if you want to think of it as in a physical analogy, I'm literally setting up two different switches. Hate Handles, thank you so much for the gift subs. Really appreciate that. So I'm basically taking two separate switches, and I am going to put my lab machines on each one, and then I am going to connect both of those switches to different interfaces on my pfSense router. Okay, so the pfSense router is going to control the stuff that is on those individual switches, and then the router itself, for its WAN connection, if you want to think about it that way, is in turn going to connect up to my main network uplink. So the pfSense router is the edge, is the gateway there for all the stuff in the lab. That's the plan. So for my internet connected, I'm going to do 192.168.99.0/24. And the gateway, we're going to call it as 192.168.99.1. We're not going to do v6. All good then. There's my new switch. Wait, what? Gateway. Default gateway already exists on interface. Bridge 0. Oh. Can I just delete that? Cool. Love it. So I didn't even have to do that. So I made my switch. And now let's make another one. We'll call this SecLab isolation. And I don't know why. These are just the subnets that I use in my head. You know, do whatever you want, but 10.1.99.0/24. Cool. If you're sitting there thinking, like, how do I learn this stuff? What is happening? I've had a pretty weird background. These days, if you don't know, I am a cybersecurity analyst, right? I'm a blue teamer, kind of. I do a lot of, web app pen testing and threat emulation, threat hunting. But I use the offensive skills in service of my team of defenders. But before that, yes, I was an educator, but also really I was an IT administrator of every possible stripe. I debated actually having like a demo on stream about how to create Ethernet cables from scratch, like how to terminate your plugs, because I've had to do that. I've had to run cable. I've had to administer switches. I've had to define networks, all sorts of stuff. Why? Because nonprofits don't pay IT professionals. And so if you want to do something, you have to learn how to do that. The Guar knows the struggle real well. My kindred Canadian spirit. Yeah, so if you that's how I learned how to program, right? There was a thing that I wanted to do for the school I was working at, and we couldn't afford it. It was like, all right, I guess I'm writing code. Confession, the first production application I ever wrote was in FileMaker Pro, and that, like, hating FileMaker was really what pushed me over into building my own thing. Okay, so we've got our two switches here. Let's build a VM. I have already uploaded some ISOs for us to use, and if we look into if I go to like local here, you can kind of see that Proxmox sets this up for me already. How cool is this? ISO images, not only can I upload them because I had them on my local machine, but I can straight download from a URL here. It is super handy. So I've got like Windows Server, I've got pfSense, I've got KDE Neon if I want to do a Linux jump box, and I've got Ubuntu Server 2004 ready to go. I guess I'm going to have to replace that with 2204 soon. And it's set up in this handy dandy ISO images section, so I don't even have to like worry about that. It also uses curl as the back end. Oh, cool. Good to know. How did you bypass the 90-day trial for Windows machines? I didn't. That's why we're talking about using Packer and Terraform to easily bring the machines back up, and then Ansible to reconfigure them after the 90-day period has elapsed. However, you can actually extend that a little bit longer than 90 days. This is how. If you haven't, do I have Flare isn't running? You know what? Let me bring Flare up. It won't work anymore with Flare, I'm pretty sure, but if you need to, there is a command you can run. Most folks who have to deal with this know this. It's like SL and MGR VBS rearm. Yeah. So if you if you need to renew your license, you can do SL in an admin console. You can start up slmgr.vbs/rearm, and that'll allow you to rearm the trial. It won't work forever. It works 3 times. And you have to be connected to the internet. It doesn't work otherwise. What's Flare? Flare is my malware analysis environment from Mandiant. It's basically a set of scripts that configures a Windows machine into a malware analysis device. Yeah. So I don't actually need to run this. We showed the command. But so one of the things that we found out is that if you so I don't use Remnux that often. Killer, I'm not so much a defer person, so I don't use Remnux as much. I use Flare when I'm doing a lot of malware analysis because it's got the Windows native stuff on it that I'm usually looking at. I have Remnux, but yeah, usually it's either, if it's a Linux sort of thing, I'll use my Kali machine that has some defer tools installed, and I'm more familiar with that environment. But yeah, I do have Remnux. I don't use it that often. But maybe we will. Maybe we'll set it up in the lab and use it. Oh, right. So the other point I wanted to make was you have to use that rearm trick. You have to be connected to the internet. And if you're not connected to the internet, after that, I think it's 30 days, your VM will shut off. Not after the VM will shut off after an hour of use, after your license expires. And that is a problem that TryHackMe and Hack the Box rooms both experience. That as they get older, the machines, if they haven't been re-uploaded with new versions of the VM, you don't actually have 2 hours on TryHackMe to complete a Windows room. You only have 1 hour, because after 1 hour, the thing's going to shut down and you won't know, because it doesn't, the terminate, right? The status isn't like really dynamic on TryHackMe. It's not heart beating the server. And so Like, it'll give you the IP address, but if the machine shuts down without you pressing the terminate button, it won't know. And so you won't have any visual indicator that the server is shut down. But yeah, after an hour, it's gone, which is a problem I've run into way too many times on TryHackMe and sometimes in Hack the Box. So just be aware of that. Okay. How Packer bypasses the time limit. Sure. It doesn't. What Packer does is it rebuilds the OVF or the VMDK or whatever else. So what I want to do is, let me go over to the virtual box. Let's look at the Windows Server config script. So it builds out. It pulls the ISO. Hey, Nicholas. It configures the server the way that I want to do it. And then it outputs this OVF. What I would do from there is then use Terraform or Vagrant or whatever else to configure the new VM, and then use Ansible once it's up and configured to reapply any of the settings from the previous VM. So in order to make this work on a recurring basis, we do have to add in some automation for post-provisioning, and that's what Ansible is going to do for us. And Ansible, we actually have... Go to SecLab Playbooks, is that right? Yes. This one's public, by the way. If we go to SecLab Playbooks, you can see some of what is intended here. So let's say I wanted to set up a WordPress server for my machine. An Ansible playbook to create a WordPress server requires 2 roles. Oh, this actually should be Moodle. My bad. I gotta change that. Perfect. But the Moodle server requires 2 roles, Moodle and LAMP. If I go into LAMP in my roles here, you'll see that there's a LAMP and a tasks and a main. And this is how you build out the LAMP requirements. So on my Linux machines, I would install Apache 2. I'd install PHP, MySQL, all good. And PHP, MySQL, the module, and then MySQL server itself. Apache. Hey, I know, but let me tell you something. Routing WordPress on Nginx sucks. And Moodle too. Like, you can do it, but it's a major pain. And the way that Apache handles routing for it, like, it works out of the box, which is why the LAMP stack is still a thing. Another role here is domain controller. So if we look at for the domain controller task, this is how you make a Windows server into a domain controller via Ansible. So we set up the stuff, we change the host name, we install Active Directory using these plugins. Use Apache for reverse proxy in front of Nginx. Oh, wild. I would have done the opposite. Yeah, so you can install this Win feature plugin is available as a feature of Ansible. And so it makes it very easy to integrate with Windows. Real simple. Set the internal DNS, create the reverse DNS zone. And once you've done that, I mean, this promotes the thing to a domain controller. And after that, you can add users or whatever else you want to do. So really easy to start building this out using Ansible. Okay, we've been talking for like an hour here. Let's build a dang VM. Because I haven't done this on Proxmox yet. I want to see how it goes. So I want to build out pfSense and see how we can do this. I'm going to create a VM. Looks good. The name is going to be SecLab Router. Ooh, cannot have dashes, I guess. Can I do underscores? No. OS. Use an image. The ISO image is pfSense. Thank you so much. It is not Linux. pfSense is BSD. So looks good there. Next. This looks all fine. I don't need to mess with anything there. The disk. 32 gigs is more than sufficient for pfSense. That's fine. CPU. One socket, also fine. Memory. It does not need this much memory. 512 megs is more than sufficient for pfSense. Try to do something similar. pfSense, a DC and a workstation to play around with AD. Try to write about the attacks. Yeah, it's really fun to do. All right. How do you figure out the memory needed for pfSense? Well, sometimes it's in the documentation. But also, yeah, it's by scale. The truth is, like, I watched my load on pfSense in an environment similar to this one and saw what it was doing. Yeah. And I have yet to build out an environment, including domain controllers and the whole smash, that this wasn't more than sufficient for. What would I suggest for a 30 device environment? God, devices are not your problem. It's the bandwidth going, it's your throughput. So I can't really answer that question, but, you know, try to figure out what the load is on any given day. Yeah, the number of machines inside, like, let's say you have all machines and they're not sending traffic, they're just on the network. The only thing that your pfSense machine is doing really is DHCP and then nothing, or ARP, I guess. But that's not really a lot of load. So it really has to do with what you're doing with those machines and how much of it is really getting, like, how much of it is going to be new routing. Because if it's a lot of intercommunication, not a lot of internet communication, that actually gets to be less intense over time. Why? Because your routing is cached. So it's just like you through. It doesn't have to do a lot of thinking about where things go. You know what I mean? So you're gonna have pfSense for DHCP and everything else connected on a private network. Not quite, Sin. So what we're planning to do is have pfSense be the edge for two different virtual networks. One of them is going to be our infrastructure stuff that needs connection to the internet, and one of them is going to be the lab environment that doesn't have a connection to the internet. But I want both of them. I am going to use pfSense just for ease of use to have DHCP for both of them, and then for NAT if I want to do any kind of natting or anything else like that. That's the plan. And so the pfSense machine is going to have two separate NICs, one of them for my internet uplink and that connected machine, or that connected network, and then another one that is totally closed. Okay, can I add more than one device? Advanced. What the? Maybe I can add one afterward? No. It's really not what I mean. We'll see if we can add it after we make it. Okay. Finish. All right, SecLab router, hardware, add. There it is, network device. So this one we're gonna add isolation, same deal. Dope. Yeah. Oh, we actually need 3, don't we? Because one of them is the uplink. This should be on bridge 0. And then this one should be on the... And this right here is where Security Onion stops being able to do what I want it to do. So think about a router, right? I need a WAN interface, which is my internet uplink, and that's going to be what connects to like my home internet, right? Then I need 2 internal interfaces. One that's going to be the internet connected network, like for my Ansible server and a jump box or whatever else I want to do. And I need my isolation lab interface, and they're 2 separate things. So I actually need 3 interfaces here, and it's at that point when setting up Security Onion in that kind of an environment is just total trash. Okay, so we're gonna add another network device, and that one's gonna be on isolation. All good? Okay, fantastic. 0, 1, 2. And we can set up snapshots if we want. Firewall. Oh, that's cool that it has like a built-in firewall, even though pfSense is one. And I think we're ready to go. Powering up. Yeah, there's no VNC. Right. So would I set up Snort or Suricata within pfSense for detection? I can, but I also don't have to. The plan is to set up my own SIM server. Interesting. Well, how do we connect to this thing? It stopped. Yeah, start failed. QEMU exit. A VM Bridge 1 does not exist. Interesting. Okay, let's go back up to our... Oh, apply configuration. Good job, Taggart. That's actually a thing in pfSense too. There's this apply button after you like do a NAT rule or change something else up, and it like if you don't know where to look for it, it can hide from you. All right, let's try that again. Start. CPU jump. Does anyone do exploit dev in containers? Sure. Not me. Do I get a console now? Ha 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 ha! Yes! Wow, that feels good. I have to tell you, this is already, like, I use VMware. This already feels better to me. Maybe because it feels a little bit closer to the metal. How are you using 105% of CPU? Well, I don't know, man. How do you go to like 110% on the reactor of the Red October? But they did. I accept. I'm going to install pfSense. Default key map. Auto. We don't really have to do anything crazy with the installation here. Select. Fine. Fine. We need to download more RAM. Hey, OreoBite. Are you sure you want to destroy the content? By the way, I am old enough that I feel so weirdly comforted and nostalgic by this NCurse's screen. I just have to point that out. Like, God, yes, this blue screen with the gigantic shadow here. I'm 10 and I'm installing a Sound Blaster on my 386 machine with the turbo button. I didn't play Kraz. I played a lot of Myst. I played Commander Keen. Old Windows defry graphics. Do you wish to proceed with wiping out the Earth? I mean, we had a good run. Oh boy. That's right, the Guar. New show, Elder Millennial Gaming Hour. I also miss hearing the arms moving around on plate drives back in the day. You start doing a heavy read write. God. So there are like YouTube videos of just those sounds for hours. Being shown how to hex edit Kraz to cheat was your first introduction. Man, so I had a slightly later introduction, which was hacking on Jedi Knight object files. That was my real introduction to stuff. Where in Jedi Knight, you would be able to change up object files so that like you could run around the map as a health pack. Everybody, time to make the cross-compile podcast. How to get old games to work on Linux. You know what? Old games work great. I have a lot of stuff from GOG, and it, you know, with DOSBox or whatever, it works totally fine. Do I want to make any changes? I do, but not yet. Just kidding. Oh, frickin'. The window closed because Vimium, I pressed X and Vimium thought that meant I wanted to close the window. There we go. Okay, let's reboot. This is so exciting. I didn't think it was going to go that smoothly. All right, so our router is up. Don't jinx it. Yeah, that's true. My desk is a beautiful, beautiful piece of mahogany. It's a desk that I inherited from my grandfather. It has given me nothing but good fortune. Not great for cable management, but I'm not getting rid of this desk. Cable management only matters if you're showing off your cable management. Exactly. That's what twist ties are for. Yeah, twist ties and the Velcro little wrappers. I'm definitely anti-cable shaming. Okay, so this thing has booted, and dropped an image of proof in Discord. Oh, cool. What in the world is cable management? You just need good memory. Okay. Cable management does matter, not for your house maybe, but in real places. God. One of the things I had to learn how to do because I was at a place with terrible management was learn how to use a toner, where you plug in a tone emitter, right, that to induce a signal into a cable, and then go trace it down in the data center to find what cable is what. I spent a lot of time doing that. I finally got one of my main Macs recabled with switches between the patches. The Guar, how good did that feel? Okay, so first of all, a couple things to note here. I've got a DHCP address from the WAN, which is perfect. And check this out. If I go to 192.168.1.103, and I'm okay with it being, I can static assign it if I want. But that should be bridged. I should be able to get there. Unless, oh wait, is it going to be a thing? Crap. I can close my slides. Oh no, so the problem... Oh wait, no. I have to make the configurator available on the WAN is the trick. Trying to remember how to do that. Yeah. To open the firewall GUI, create a firewall rule to allow. Yeah. Okay. So we'll set this up. What we'll do is we'll set up a jump box inside the network in a second. But for right now, where's that console? Let's set up the rest of the stuff that we need. So we have to assign interfaces. So should VLAN setup be right now? No. Enter the WAN interface. So that's obviously going to be EM0. No, I don't have TMUX, do I? But it is EM0 because it's the first one up. Enter the LAN interface. So the LAN interface is going to be EM1. And the second one is going to be called optional, but we're going to change its name into isolation, and I'll show you how we do that in a second. But obviously we're going to do EM2 for optional. Okay. Yes. Good. Thank you. Now, this interface is just all like helpful bash scripting, basically. There is a full shell for pfSense if you want to get to it. Okay. So let's see. I want to set the interfaces, IP addresses. So I want to set up the WAN IP address, actually, because I want it to be static. I don't want to have to guess what my router's, my pfSense IP is. So I'm going to set that first. No, do not configure it with DHCP. So it's going to be 192.168.1.51, 24-bit. And then it is a WAN, so we have to give it 1.1 as our gateway. No IP6. Do you want to revert to HTTP as the web configured protocol? No. Okay, so just in case that worked. 192.168.1.51. Nope. No IPv6, all my homies. So here's the thing about IP6. It won't catch on. NAT is like a solved problem. Whereas figuring out how to integrate stuff with IP6, even at like the embedded device layer, where it wasn't expecting that many bits in the network address, is like a massive problem. You can choose any IP like for the WAN, or does it have to be on that subnet 192.168? So, Sin, the reason I have to do it in the 192.168.1 subnet is because that's what my router out to the internet is using, right? That's like my actual house. You know, it's not everything on my house, but like that's part of that. That's why it has to be that. Yeah, I'm bridged. So instead, for anything internal, I can do whatever I want. I use class C's because I'm supposed to, but I could make it whatever I want. Okay. Let's set up the other interfaces. So we're going to set up EM1. And so this is going to be 192.168.99.1. And a 24-bit subnet mask is totally fine. And it's a LAN interface, so I don't need to do that. No IP6. Do I want to enable DHCP? Yes, I do. I want anything on this machine or on this network to get a DHCP address from this. Enter the start address of the IP4. Right, so we're going to do 192.168.99.100 and 192.168.99.254. So the reason I set these up this way, this is something I've done for a long time. I don't have 256 hosts that I need to host in this subnet. But what I do here is I'll start the DHCP pool at 100, and then anything below that, I can set static IPs and not have to worry about it, and I'll know that they're static. That's just kind of how mentally I separate my subnets. Do I want to revert to HTTP? No, I do not. Okay. And then last one here. Notice it tells us that we can actually access the web configurator from internally there. Now, we don't have a machine on that network yet, but we will soon. The last one we're going to do is set the isolation lab IP. Actually, You want to see? So let's do something cool. Let's go to the shell for a second. One second. Forget what this. The answer to my question is in my own repository. I love when that happens. pfSense packer. Conf config.xml. That's where I want to go. There's an XML file that that defines every single thing that the machine does. So vim conf config.xml. Sorry, vi. So instead of it be calling it opt, because I don't want it called opt1 or the description. I don't want it to be opt1. I want it to be called isolation. Ah. It's not showing me stuff. So let me go to opt1. So I have to be like careful about this. So I'm gonna 1, 2, 3, 4, and then insert isolation, and then save that. Okay. Exit the shell. Yeah, no exploit. So now what should happen if we reload it or reboot it? Yeah, let's reboot the system and see if it tells us that it's opt. Reboot normally. What should happen now is the description is going to be called isolation, and that's just a nice, creature comfort thing that I like to do. I was trying to try to add something to the streamers list on InfoSec streams the other day. There we go. We're booting up. Look how fast this thing is. And look how much more fun we're having than we would be with a Palo Alto firewall. Did you know, though, that Palo Alto has a free license? You can like, get some sort of lab environment from Palo. Have I used OpenSense? OpenSense. Well, we're using pfSense. Do you mean like the email thing? No, I haven't. Oh, look at this. FreeBSD-based firewall. Oh, God. Is this like FreeNAS versus OpenNAS? It's a pfSense fork. Oh, that's cool. Oh, OPNSense. There it is. Nifty. No, I haven't. What's the story here? Very cool looking. I will look into this. Thank you so much for the recommendation, Sin. Okay. Let's take a look at our console here, see how we're doing. Yeah, you love to see it. So now it's called isolation, which is just handy. Okay. And DHCP is set up on both of these interfaces. We're done with the router. We're going to just leave this alone now. Time to make a new VM. Now we're going to make our jump box. So our jump box is going to be... Well, I've got the KDE Neon ISO, so let's just do that. Create VM. God, so fun. I don't know about you, like, I love this stuff. I'm a system administrator at heart, so I just have such a fun, such a great time doing this kind of stuff. Good. Good. Disk. Okay, we are going to make this one a little bit bigger. We're going to give this 100 gigs. CPU, we're going to give it 2 cores. And we're going to give it 4. Yeah. Oops. Wrong thing. 4 gigs of RAM, just because I don't want it to be sluggish. So network, we're going to connect it to our sec lab to start. So what should happen is we should get a 192.168.99 IP address right off the bat. And because that thing is upstreamed, we should be able, with our router, pfSense should make sure that we can hit the internet with this. Start after created. Yes. Let's go. I'm amazed at how much space my Security Onion lab uses with that. Yeah, man, it's huge. Security Onion is gigantic. And the system requirements for Security Onion are out of control, especially if you're doing like an all-in-one deployment. They're crazy. Like 6 cores minimum. All right. Hey, Czar. The lab is coming along. We just got our pfSense router set up, and now we're building out a jump box so we can actually interface with the thing and start configuring it the way that we want. Why did... Oh, Killer saw down at the bottom, why did command apt update error? That is a licensing thing. So Proxmox will update more frequently if you pay for the enterprise licensing, basically. It's not really impacting my operations. But if I want to pay for, like, if I want to pay like $100 a year, then I get more frequent updates and support, which I may do. Look at that. Okay, so just to prove a point here, we're still in the like trial system here. Let's go to console. All right, let's see. IPAS 192.168.99.100. You got it. Ping C4. Okay, Killer, first of all, always be branding. We're not pinging Google, we're pinging taggarttech.com. Let's go. All right. We are ready to install. Although the truth is that we can actually just hit our admin from here. We wouldn't even have to. Why is it console? Because KDE. Everything begins with K. Just to prove a point here. Oh God, Firefox, you're so gross. 192.168.1. Nope. 99.1. Yeah. Well. Hello, pfSense. So we actually have the ability to connect to this right now, but I'm gonna install this jump box so we can continue to use it. I am in LA. AquaPro, thank you so much for the follow. English US looks good. Erase disk. What's my name? Great. Wait, is KDE short for the K desktop environment? Yes, it is. It's really called Plasma now, the desktop environment, and then KDE, yeah, KDE is like the framework that is used to unify all of the parts of it. And there are a lot of KDE family applications. Console is one of them, which is a great terminal emulator. Kate, I think, yeah, is a text editor that it beats the pants off of gedit. Cool. There's also Kmail. Kmail is nice. It's a non-terrible desktop mail client. If you've been suffering with Thunderbird, you might want to check it out. Okay, well, anyway, while this is going, we're actually in pfSense now. Can I make this bigger? No, that's fine. Yes, next. Good. The first thing it should make us do is change our password. Hostname. Router. Domain. The default behavior of DNS resolver will ignore manually configured DNS for client queries. You know, Prax, I do too, honestly, these days. Although, I can't use one for work. My domain is going to be zeroday.local. It's going to be our Windows domain internally as well. Zeroday.local. Primary DNS server. We'll just use the quads here. That's fine for now. We can fix all this later if we want. It's all good. I don't really care about. What's my time zone? It's not ETC. Give me America. Los Angeles. What are your plans? Sorry, so it's not just a Windows Lab environment. Anytime we want to test something, we are going to build it out here. Everything is going to get controlled via Ansible, but we're going to have web servers in here. We're going to have Windows machines. We're going to have a malware analysis lab in here as well. So anything that we basically want to do, we want to spin up, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it with Terraform and Ansible. So Terraform for provisioning and Ansible for post-provisioning to add roles. That's the plan. Will I be sharing on GitHub? Everything that goes into this will be shared on GitHub, yes. Why? I don't want to configure. We already did this. Yeah, we're not going to make any changes here. Okay, we have to set up the admin password. Okay, so pfSense is configured, except this is the most important part. Changing to the dark theme. I think I have to like log out and log back in. Do I prefer Ansible over Salt Stack for any particular reason? Okay, Cobra Style, you didn't need to, but you hit a nerve. I hate Salt. Nothing about it makes any sense to me, and the way that it abstracts out your configuration is so freaking annoying. I do not like Salt. I do not like it on a plane. I do not like it on a train. Yeah, Ansible is way saner to me in the way that it does its configuration. Can we talk about how it took internet 20 years for dark mode to get normal? That's not a mystery. We know why. It's because internet pages were designed to be printed out. Hey, Husky. Yeah, that's why light mode was standard for so long. You had to think about printers. So many pages were designed to be easily printed, and this was before you had CSS that was alternative for printing pages. Yeah. It's not like a mystery. Some of you might, God, this bummed me out, but some of you might be too young to remember the fact that we used to have to print out directions from MapQuest to get to where we were going before we had, you know, Google Maps on our phone. People really said, I'm going to print the website rather than screenshot it. Yeah, Killer, because we didn't have smartphones. Okay, so we're in here. Let's take a look at what we have set up right now. We have WAN, LAN, and isolation, right? So what I want to do with isolation is I'm going to set up a specific firewall rule. And basically my firewall rule, hey Security Live, thanks for the resub. Really appreciate that, friend. What I want to do with my isolation firewall rule, oh, my bad. Or WAN really. Because I don't have isolation, but what I want to do is like deny from isolation. What role does the jump box play in the network? So the jump box is going to be my easy in without doing like crazy routing from my actual house network into the lab, and I don't really want to do that anyway. The jump box is going to be my interface point between the isolation lab and what I have in my infrastructure as well. So basically, if I want to SSH into something, I'm going to do it from the jump box. So I get the jump box up and going, and that's how I will handle things. So what I'll eventually do, so that's isolating the lab and the home network. Right, exactly right. So what I may eventually do for ease of use is set up a single, maybe set up a bridged interface so I have a direct in here and VNC in to this machine rather than doing this console, because this console is limited in resolution and things like that. See how the installation's going. Oh, it's done. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and restart that then. Tail scale. Maybe. That's a lot for like one machine. Oliver Pandus, or Culiver Pandus, thank you so much for the follow. Yeah, what I want to try to avoid, and also what I want to impress on people, is there are a million cool tools to do something, but don't add complexity where you don't need it. If the system that you're using has the ability to do something without adding an external dependency, figure out how to do it that way. Not only will you learn more about the system in the process, but you don't add, every time you add a dependency like that, you're adding technical debt. And you don't want to add technical debt. What you want to add is, instead of adding technical debt, add skill. It's a better investment for both you and, by the way, for an organization. I'm a big believer that you want to, in an organization, you want to invest more heavily in skill building for your team than you do in tools. Yes, there's a balance to be had there, and yes, you need enterprise support sometimes for things. But if all you do is pay vendors for support and your people can't actually do anything, you're in such a dangerous position. John J., thank you so much for the follow. How do I feel about homegrown tools? So as somebody who operates in this universe by making stuff, my first instinct is to build my own solution. And here's the thing, John Doe, I'm wrong. I shouldn't do that. Built especially in an enterprise, homegrown tools should be used if and only if available solutions do not fit the bill, do not solve the problem. Because a homegrown tool, unless you're a dev shop and unless you have a real like embedded development team, you add so much responsibility to yourself probably, or to your team to maintain that tool, that it's almost never worth it to do it. And I'm speaking as somebody who's made their own tools and knows what this feels like. Sandra, thank you so much for the resub. Really appreciate that. Yeah, it should be an option of last resort. It really should be. All right, so now this thing is up. It's a pain having to always rely on someone else. We're doing that. Everybody relies on somebody else. Or some other team to take care of the tools. Yeah, bad at hacking, but here's the thing. If you're the one that's responsible for maintaining a tool that someone else is going to use, now you're that person. Like, you're the person someone else has to rely on. And if it's... Yeah, be good at roll my own kernel. Exactly, sorry. If your job is not specifically to maintain tools, which if it is, awesome. But you want to make sure that people aren't not... let me try that one again. You want to make sure that people are doing their jobs, not building tools to do their jobs, unless building tools is their job. Funny, the DoD recommends acquiring free tools, then making your own before buying them. Well, we should always listen to what the DoD has to say about software acquisition. No mistakes ever made there. When I was in the EDU space, human capital was cheaper, so we always built things. In the corporate world, it became something that was good enough. Somebody else. So in the EDU space, yes, it's true that human capital was cheaper. But here's the thing. I think that's also, like, bad accounting if you think about it that way. Because I guarantee you that people burnt out trying to do too much, including building your own tools, and your turnover was higher because people were getting burnt out having to do those extra beats of essentially unpaid labor or labor way beyond their job description, right? And so you actually ended up spending more money and losing productivity over people doing that and then leaving and then having to retrain new people, rather than striking a better balance between homebrew tools and shelling out for support when it's appropriate. There's a balance to be struck there. I'm a huge believer in open source, but sometimes you just need the thing to work. Okay, so our jump box is up and running, and what I want to do with it, I'm going to close the console to it actually. I'm going to edit it. Right, if I go to hardware, I'm going to add a network device, and I'm going to add a bridge interface here, and cool. There's like other stuff I'm going to have to set up, but if I want my jump box to actually work, if I go back into this, what should happen now if I go to console, yeah, so I got a 1 address. So if I wanted to set up tight VNC, I could do that and then VNC into this thing, no problem whatsoever. And then that's what I will use as my jumping off point for everything else. Now, before I go any further, I just have to change this to a dark theme because it's going to drive me crazy if I don't. Dark theme. Beautiful. Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll set up the VNC connection. Does Proxmox have a dark mode? I didn't see one, but maybe. I didn't see any place where I could set it. Looks like no, but there's a GitHub repository we could add to. Oh, that's nice. Okay, I will test this. I don't feel like borking my Proxmox install accidentally with this right now. But I will check it out. Okay. Our jump box is running. Now, to set up tight VNC, to set up a VNC server, it's a little bit interesting if you've never done it. But before we go any further, there's something that we should definitely do, which is take a snapshot. So we're taking a snapshot of our pfSense router so that if we do screw something up, we can restore to it. All right. Awesome. And Backups aren't backups until you have restored them. Very true. Okay, now our jump box. I always forget which way I want to do that. If I want to do Tiger VNC or other. But I do know I like the tight VNC for Windows. Yeah. Dark Reader for Proxmox web interface. Sharyuga, maybe, but again, let's not add complexity where we don't need it. Okay, tight VNC is getting set up. Meanwhile, over in KDE, let's see what we have. Apt search VNC. I think I want the tight VNC server. Oh, I've got a UAC button. Sorry about that. Okay, so I have a VNC viewer. Now, tight VNC, I feel like no view only password. Okay, new X desktop is SecLab Jumpbox 1. Okay. Is it running? So we're gonna find out. So 192.168.1.106. Let's try our tight VNC viewer. I feel like I have to start it, don't I? 22.168.1.106. Yeah. I have to start it. Is that right? Yes. And then I have to do why am I totally netstat? Why I don't know why I was blanking on that. Okay, 1501, 1502. 1502 is the one I want because there we go. I never use LSOF. That's why. All right, so I'm connected here, although it doesn't appear to be doing much for me. I may have to set up some weird configurations to make VNC work with my jump box. Especially on KDE, I think. Let's see if let's see if the one on 5901 actually worked better. Nope, no difference. Just a different geometry. Now, what happens if I close this? Do I get any? No. Yeah. Oh, interesting. KRFB is a server. Oh, KDE has its own thing. Well, that's great. Thank you, KDE. I've actually never done this on KDE before. Ah, I hate that. Where I Control W deletes the last word, right? But if you do it in a browser window, it closes the window. Oh, is it 2066? Yeah, there we go. And 2290. Okay. Great. And then also, ugh. We're just going to remove this. Last time you used KDE, it felt bloated and slow. Smithy, when was that? Because the modern Plasma desktop actually, first of all, is multi-threaded, unlike GNOME, and uses fewer resources than the GNOME desktop. Give KDE a try. Yeah, give it another shot. Give it another shot. There's a reason why I've been using it for a long time, and it's now even faster than it used to be. I really like it. Yeah, no. The Plasma 5 desktop is a whole other animal. It has the endorsement of both me and Husky Hacks, so I feel like that alone should be imprimatur enough. Okay, so we're going to do KRFB, right? Sudo apt install KRFB. Oh, good. Bot the Arch user. Don't worry. They'll out themselves. Smash, I used to be an Arch user, and then I decided I want my stuff to work instead of having to rebuild stuff from source all the time. That's not a dig, by the way, on Arch. It's just that I'm at a different point in my life where I've learned what I need to learn about that part of the Linux OS, and I need more stability. Okay. This is so neat. So we just set this up. That's so great. I love that it's just going to give the password away in plain text. Is that literally it? Incredible. Okay. So does the tight VNC viewer work with this? We'll accept the connection and then we'll enable unintended access. Yes. Okay, so we can close this up, and in my VNC window, which is going to be a little bit snappier, can I change up the display? I can. I'm going to drop it down to like why not? Wait. Hold on a second. Come on. It's not 1024 by 768 anymore. If I reconnect, now that I've reconfigured it that way, will it work? Apparently, yes? No. All right, I'll look into that. But the point is we've got VNC working. And I do still need to set up unattended access, though. Or not? Can I not run it when it's connected? We'll reboot and see what happens. But, okay, so we've got our jump box. Great news. And we're pretty much ready to go for our next step, which is building out our Ansible stuff and starting to get our network online. I think we're going to call it there. I know this wasn't a whole lot of like blue teamy stuff, but it's a lot of good setup. And I think we made some good progress today. We talked about Proxmox. We talked about how to get our networking architecture set up. So good day's work. Neon Damon, thank you so much for the follow. So I think we're going to call it a day there. See if there's anybody currently streaming. Is Hate Handles actually streaming?
Wow.
It looks like yes, so we're going to give them a good old raid. All right. All right, friends. Thank you so much for hanging out. I'll be back on Tuesday doing some more Red Team stuff, and Wednesday doing programming. So until next time, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and happy hacking. We'll see ya.